The dining room was a stage lit by flickering candles and the fake warmth of a holiday performance. I sat on the edge of my chair, hiding the tremors in my hands while my family celebrated a success I did not share. Suddenly, Grandma Evelyn stood and pointed a silver fork at me. At our Thanksgiving party, my grandma yelled at me, "Why is an elderly couple living in the $1 million vacation home I bought for you?" I froze and said, "What are you talking about? I am homeless right now." At that moment, my parents turned pale. Then the lawyer arrived. Malcolm Pierce did not wait for an invitation to enter. He stepped into the foyer with a heavy briefcase that sounded like a gavel when he set it down. My father's practiced smile shattered into a jagged mask of terror. My mother's wine glass tilted, spilling deep red liquid across the white linen cloth, like a fresh wound. Nobody moved as the lawyer clicked the brass locks open. The sharp metallic sound echoed through the silent house. My parents exchanged a frantic, silent glance that confirmed my worst fears. They were not surprised by him. The lawyer began sliding glossy photographs across the table. They showed a wide wooden deck overlooking a sapphire lake. In every frame, my sister Belle was smiling next to her husband and two strangers. Evelyn's eyes turned into cold flint as she stared at the images. She had been overseas for 3 years, sending letters I never received. I realized then that my mailbox was not the only thing they had hijacked. My father reached for a photograph, but Malcolm pinned it to the table with a firm, steady hand. The air felt thin and toxic. "Raymond, look at the signature on this deed," Malcolm commanded. I leaned forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. There it was at the bottom of the page. My name was written in bold, confident ink I did not recognize. It was a perfect forgery, executed with a precision that required intimate knowledge of my handwriting. I felt a sick wave of vertigo wash over me. For years, I believed I was failing because of my own incompetence. Now I saw the paper trail of a deliberate, calculated theft. My sister refused to meet my eyes. The lawyer pulled out a digital tablet and turned the screen toward the guests. He showed a history of bank transfers that made my stomach turn. Every month, my student loan payments were diverted into an account held by my mother. They had intentionally destroyed my credit score to keep me from renting an apartment. By keeping me broken, they ensured I would never have the resources to find this house. My mother started to weep, but there was no sorrow in her eyes. She was only calculating her next desperate lie. 2 sheriff's deputies appeared in the doorway, their uniforms dark against the festive decorations. My mother immediately pointed at me, screaming that I was having a violent mental episode. It was the same script she had used for years to discredit my voice. This time, however, Malcolm held up a small recording device. He informed everyone that every confession and reaction had been captured in high definition. The deputies did not look at me. They walked straight toward my father and clicked the first pair of heavy steel handcuffs into place. His empire of image was finally dead. The handcuffs clicked around Belle's wrists with a finality that shook the room. My sister did not fight the deputies as they led her toward the door. She looked small and broken beneath the heavy chandelier. My mother reached out, but her hand stopped in midair. She realized there was no narrative left to spin. The silence that followed was thick with the scent of pine and betrayal. I felt the weight of 3 years finally begin to lift. I turned my focus to the mahogany desk in the corner. My father's private laptop sat there like a dark monument to his crimes. I needed the password to unlock the final records of the diverted funds. He had hidden the bank account, Details behind layers of encryption. If I did not get them tonight, the money might vanish into offshore accounts. I looked at my father, who was still slumped in the corner. He refused to look up. "You have one chance to fix this, Dad," I said. My voice was steady despite the rage burning in my chest. He chuckled, a dry sound that had no humor in it. "You always were too soft for this world, Raymond," he whispered. He thought his silence was a final victory over me. But Grandma Evelyn stepped forward, with a piece of paper in her hand. It was a formal notice of total disinheritance for every family member present. The power shifted as Bradley saw the document. He realized his legacy was dissolving into ash before his eyes. Without Evelyn's support, his remaining business interests would collapse by morning. He looked at the deputies, then back at the desk. His pride was a brittle thing in the face of absolute poverty. He finally muttered a string of numbers and characters. It was the key to his kingdom. I typed the code into the glowing machine. The screen flickered to life and revealed a massive spreadsheet. It showed every dollar stolen from my student loan accounts. But it also showed something much worse than simple theft. There were recurring payments to a private investigator in Chicago. I realized my father had been tracking my every move while I was homeless. He knew I was sleeping in my car. He watched me struggle and did nothing. He enjoyed the view from his high tower. I scrolled further down the list of expenses. My heart stopped when I saw a recent entry for a local locksmith. It was dated just 2 days ago. They had planned to change the locks on the lakehouse before Evelyn arrived. They wanted to erase my existence completely before she could ask questions. But the investigator had made a mistake in his final report. There was a second set of keys hidden in the house. I knew where. I grabbed my coat and prepared to leave the chaos behind. Evelyn walked me to the door and squeezed my hand. "Go home, Raymond," she said with a tired smile. I walked out into the cold night air. The flashing blue lights reflected off the snow like diamonds. I had the keys and I had the truth. But as I started my car, a black sedan pulled up behind me. A man I did not recognize stepped out. The man in the black said and adjusted his tie. He held a badge against the glass. He was the investigator my father hired. I lowered my window and felt the biting wind. The man looked tired and held a thick yellow envelope. He told me the surveillance was over. He wanted to get paid before the police froze the accounts. I realized he had proof of the parents' location during the forgery. He was not a threat but a greedy witness. I snatched the envelope and checked the contents. It contained grainy photos of my mother at the lakehouse. She was holding a pen and a stack of papers. The timestamp matched the date on the forged deed exactly. This was the final nail for her defense. I handed him the cash I had hidden in my glove box. It was all the quarters and crumpled bills I saved. He nodded once and disappeared into the dark. The proof was finally in my hands. The drive to the lakehouse was a blur of gray. I reached the tall gates and stopped the car. I remembered the locksmith entry on the laptop spreadsheet. The code I knew did not work anymore. They had successfully changed the electronic locks earlier that morning. I was standing in the cold, locked out of my own life. I looked at the dark windows of the massive structure. It looked like a tomb for my grandmother's kindness. Then I remembered the secret. I walked to the stone birdbath near the porch. My sister always hid a spare key under the loose tile. I pried the frozen stone up with a pocket knife. The metal key was still there, cold and jagged. I checked the tag. It was labeled for the side entrance. I hurried to the side door and turned the lock. the house sighed as the seal broke open. I stepped into a hallway filled with expensive shadows. It smelled like expensive candles and a deep, rotting secret. I was finally inside the $1,000,000 trap. I headed straight for the library, behind the main staircase, to find the safe. I needed the original title documents Grandma mentioned earlier. The room was lined with books that nobody ever read. I moved a painting of the Georgia coast. The safe was a modern model with a biometric scanner. My father had registered my thumbprint years ago for emergencies. I held my breath and pressed my skin to the glass. The light turned red and a sharp alarm began to blare. My access was revoked. The siren screamed through the empty, hollow rooms. I heard a floorboard creak on the level above me. Someone was already in the house, despite the darkness. I grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the desk. The footsteps were slow and heavy on the stairs. I retreated into the shadows of the velvet curtains. A tall figure appeared in the doorway holding a suppressed pistol. It was Logan, the husband my sister had betrayed. He looked desperate and very dangerous. He did not see me in the corner yet. He walked toward the safe with a small electronic device. He was trying to bypass the lock himself. He wanted the documents to burn them before trial. I realized he was the one who helped with the shell company. He was not a victim of Belle's lies. He was the silent partner in my ruin. I moved toward him with the lamp held high. Then the front door burst open once again. More shadows entered. The siren howled through the library like a wounded beast. Logan spun around with his pistol, raised high toward the empty air. I stood perfectly still behind the heavy velvet curtain. My knuckles were white as I gripped the brass lamp. The electronic bypass device hummed on the floor beside the safe. He looked terrified and cornered in the flashing red light. I realized he was not acting on Bradley's orders tonight. He was trying to erase his own tracks before the law caught up. He looked ready to kill for his freedom. The front door slammed against the wall with a thunderous crack. I heard the heavy boots of the sheriff's deputies on the hardwood. Logan panicked and ducked behind the mahogany desk for cover. He did not know that Malcolm had tracked my car via GPS. The lawyer was not a man who left details to chance. I saw the beam of a high-powered flashlight sweep the hall. The red alarm continued to scream its mechanical warning. Logan, my brother-in-law, aimed his weapon at the library door. He was going to fire on the officers. "Drop the gun, Logan," I shouted from my hiding place. I stepped out from the shadows with my hands visible. He flinched and pointed the barrel at my chest instead. His hand was shaking so hard the gun rattled. "You were supposed to stay in the car, Raymond," he hissed. He looked like a trapped animal in the strobing lights. I saw the sweat beads on his forehead. He realized he had been seen by me in the state. There was no way to hide the weapon now. He was doomed. A deputy rounded the corner with a tactical shield held low. He barked a command for Logan to get on the ground. Logan did not move at first as his eyes searched for an exit. The deputy did not hesitate and fired a single taser lead. The sound was like a whip cracking in the small room. Logan collapsed instantly as the electricity surged through his limbs. The pistol clattered onto the rug near my feet. I kicked it away toward the bookshelves. The immediate threat was gone, but the air remained heavy. Malcolm Pierce entered the room and adjusted his silk tie. He looked at the safe and then at my face. He did not seem surprised by the biometric lock failure. He knew the parents had changed the permissions that morning. He pulled a small silver drive from his pocket. "This will override the security system, Raymond," he said calmly. He plugged the device into the safe's data port. I watched the digital display cycle through thousands of codes. The light finally turned green. The door of the safe swung open with a hiss. I reached inside and pulled out a single black ledger. It was filled with my father's cramped and messy handwriting. This was not a business book for a legitimate firm. It was a manual for the destruction of my life. Every rejected job and every ruined credit line was noted. He had recorded the names of the people he bribed. He even noted the dates he intercepted Evelyn's letters. He was obsessed with my total failure. It was a museum of his hatred. I felt a cold chill. The deputies began to bag the evidence in the room. They treated the ledger like a holy relic of crime. Malcolm looked over my shoulder at the final page. There was a list of bank account numbers in Switzerland. They were not in my father's name, or even Belle's. These accounts belonged to the investigator I met in the car. The shell company was a much larger web than we thought. My father had been planning to vanish with everything. He was going to leave his family behind too. He betrayed everyone. I realized the investigator had lied to me earlier. He did not just want his pay from my glove box. He was waiting for Logan to finish the job tonight. The man in the black sedan was still watching us. I looked out the library window at the dark driveway. The sedan was gone, but a small red light blinked. It was a GPS tracker hidden on the deputy's patrol vehicle. We were being hunted by a professional who knew our moves. The lawyer looked at the light and went very pale. "We need to leave this house right now," Malcolm whispered. He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back exit. The deputies did not understand the danger yet. They were busy with Logan and the heavy bags of evidence. I felt a laser dot dance across my chest. It was coming from the tree line near the lake. The investigator was not a witness after all. He was the final cleanup crew for the Cross family. We ran into the kitchen as the first window shattered behind us. We dived for cover. Glass sprayed across the kitchen tile like diamonds. I pulled Malcolm behind the heavy granite island. The deputies in the library shouted into their radios. The sound of rapid gunfire hammered against the exterior walls. My heart was a trapped bird in my chest. The investigator was not working for the law anymore. He was protecting the millions hidden in those Swiss accounts. He wanted the ledger I held in my hand. He was willing to kill the entire room to get it. Malcolm checked his phone with trembling, pale fingers. "We are trapped until the backup units arrive," he whispered. I looked at the back door of the kitchen. The wood was splintering under the force of the rounds. This was not a random attack by a greedy man. It was a tactical strike to erase every single witness. My father had hired a monster to clean the slate. I gripped the black ledger until the corners bit into my skin. We needed a way to fight back. I spotted the smart home panel on the wall. It controlled the security shutters and the exterior floodlights. I realized I could use the house as a weapon. I crawled across the floor, dodging the flying debris. The panel was glowing with a soft blue light. I reached up and swiped through the menus quickly. I found the command for the high-intensity garden strobes. If I could blind him, the deputies could move. I smashed the icon with my thumb. The world outside erupted into a blinding white chaos. The strobe lights flashed with a disorienting, rapid frequency. I heard the investigator cry out in sudden pain. His rhythmic firing stopped as he lost his sight. The deputies seized the moment and charged for the doors. They were trained for this kind of tactical theater. I stayed low to the ground and watched the screen. The camera showed a second vehicle approaching the gates. It was a black SUV with dark windows. The new vehicle did not belong to the police. It moved with a dangerous and silent grace. I watched the screen as three men stepped out. They were carrying heavy equipment bags and short rifles. They were not here to help the investigator escape. They moved toward him with a cold, professional intent. I realized the investigator had his own secrets to hide. The shell company had even bigger players than my father. The cleanup crew was being cleaned up tonight. I saw the men surround the sedan in seconds. There were no shouts or warnings in the yard. I heard two muffled thumps through the thick walls. The red light of the GPS tracker finally stopped. The hunter had become the prey in the darkness. Malcolm looked at the monitor and wiped his brow. He recognized the distinct hawk symbols on their tactical gear. These were not local mercenaries or common street thugs. They were high-level corporate enforcers. My family had played with fire. The enforcers turned their attention toward the lakehouse front door. They were not interested in the deputies or Logan. They wanted the digital records inside the biometric safe. I looked at the safe in the library. It was still open and vulnerable to their reach. I realized the ledger was only half the truth. There was a physical backup drive hidden in the base. It contained the real names of the offshore stakeholders. I had to get it before they entered. I ran back into the library, ignoring Malcolm's warning. The room was dark and smelled of burnt ozone. Logan was unconscious on the floor in heavy zip ties. I knelt by the safe and felt the floor. There was a small hidden compartment in the steel. I pried it open with my bare, bloody fingers. I felt a cold metal object in the dark. It was the drive that everyone was dying for. I pulled it out and felt the weight. It was warm. I heard the front door lock click open. The enforcers had used a high-tech bypass. I had no time to reach the kitchen. I ducked into the dumbwaiter shaft behind the safe. It was a narrow space meant for laundry bags. I pulled the small wooden door shut, just in time. I heard the heavy boots of the team. They were moving with a silent, terrifying speed. I could hear their breathing through the thin wood. They were right in front of me. One man tapped on the dumbwaiter door with his gun. My breath hitched as I squeezed the digital drive. I felt a small button on the side. I pressed it and a tiny screen glowed. It showed a countdown timer of 60 seconds total until the data wiped. The drive was designed to self-destruct if moved. I realized my father had rigged a final trap. If I stayed here, the drive would kill me. If I left, the men would catch me. I was truly trapped. The timer pulsed red against my sweaty palm. 40 seconds remained. I shoved the wooden, dumbwaiter door open and rolled onto the library carpet. The enforcers spun toward the sound. I threw the glowing drive toward the open steel safe. They scrambled for the prize as I dived behind the heavy mahogany desk. A muffled thud rocked the floorboards. The drive did not explode with fire. Instead, it emitted a high-frequency pulse that shorted every electronic device in the room. The library went pitch black. I heard the men cursing in the dark. Their high-tech goggles were useless now. I crawled toward the hallway, guided by the memory of the floor plan. My hand brushed against a cold metal object. It was the taser the deputy had used on Logan. I snatched it up and felt the charging light flicker. The air smelled of burnt silicon and ozone. I reached the kitchen door and saw Malcolm hiding behind the island. He held his phone, but the screen was dead. The backup units arrived with a roar of sirens and floodlights. The corporate enforcers tried to vanish into the woods, but the perimeter was already sealed. I stood in the kitchen and watched the police storm the library. they found the men blinded and helpless. I felt a strange sense of exhaustion wash over me. The war was over. I had the ledger and the shorted drive. Then, Malcolm pointed toward the driveway. A white limousine pulled up behind the patrol cars. Grandma Evelyn stepped out of the vehicle. She did not look at the chaos or the broken glass. She walked straight to me and took the black ledger. She opened the final page and sighed. The shell company was not just a family secret. It was a trust she had created decades ago. My parents had not just stolen from me. They had tried to hijack her entire legacy. She looked at the house with a wary, clinical disgust. This was never a home to them. We sat on the back porch as the sun began to rise over the lake. The water was still and gray like polished steel. Evelyn told me the truth about the elderly couple. They were her old friends who had been evicted by my sister. Belle had charged them $5,000 a month to stay in my house. Every detail was a new layer of cruelty. My sister had turned a gift of love into a predatory business. I felt the final tether snap. I looked at the key in my hand. It felt heavier now that the truth was fully revealed. I was no longer the homeless grandson or the unstable failure. I was the owner of Lanier Ridge. I stood up and walked toward the water. I threw the taser into the deep, dark lake. The ripple expanded until it touched the shore. I turned back to the house and saw a flickering light in the attic. Someone else was still hiding inside the walls. I knew the house was not truly quiet until every shadow was accounted for.